Welcome to today's webinar, More Than a Sip. This is the first of a series of webinars that will also feature the annual Vegetable Industry Seminar at Hawke Connections and another 2 webinars following Hawke Connections later on this year. Today, we're going to hear from a number of guest speakers to discuss how Hort Innovation is engaging with vegetable growers and industry stakeholders to develop a refreshed SIP for the vegetable industry that will span from 2022 to 2026. The vegetable SIP will lay the foundation for decision-making in the levy investments, representing a balanced view of stakeholders from within the industry, helping Hort Innovation prioritise and implement R&D, marketing and export needs over the next 5 years. Today, we're going to hear from speakers Matt Brand, CEO of Hort Innovation, James Whiteside, CEO of Ozveg, Adam Briggs, Head of Data and Insights at Hort Innovation, and Brian Ramsey, who's a SIP consultant. On that note, I would like to introduce Matt Brand, CEO of Hort Innovation, to say a few words.
Thanks, Nathan, and welcome to the webinar. Yes, so as Nathan alluded to, the SIP process, or the Strategic Investment Plan process that we're undertaking, is a collaborative approach for the vegetable industry, working with Ozveg and obviously levy payers across Australia to really look at, I guess, developing a roadmap which will guide our strategic investments for the vegetable levy for 2022 to 2026. And each SIP is being refreshed, and we're working through a process of engaging with the industry on their priorities. And the whole idea of the outcome for us is that we'll have a prioritised plan that we will then implement across R&D, marketing and international trade over the next 5 years. And out of that SIP process, we will then form an annual investment plan, which we will report against on a regular basis. And importantly, every year we'll check in to ensure that that SIP, that 5-year investment plan, is still on track. And if there's anything that needs to pivot or change, we will then look at how we adjust the plan accordingly. Because under our deed of agreement with the federal government, we need to continue to demonstrate the value that the levy system provides to the industry and really look at how we are capitalising on opportunities and challenges for the vegetable industry. So we're very excited about the approach and looking forward to that collaboration and working through a process to ensure that all our levy payers have got real clarity and visibility around how we're investing their levy, and for R&D, the taxpayers' contribution as well. So thanks, Nathan.
Thanks very much, Matt. I'd now like to introduce James Whiteside, CEO of Ozveg, to talk a little bit about the SIP and its importance from an industry perspective.
Thanks, Nathan, and thanks, Matt, for that introduction. Look, this plan for the Australian vegetable industry is really the most important opportunity we have to reset the priorities, if not the processes, relating to the expenditure of Hort Innovation's largest fund, being the Vegetable Industry R&D Initiatives. Firstly, I think it's important for us to understand exactly what our role at Ozveg is in this process as the industry representative body. We're responsible for seeking grower approval for the establishment and maintenance of the levies, and we play an informal role in working with Hort Innovation to oversee levy management. We're also sometimes a vendor. We submit proposals from time to time for projects tendered by Hort Innovation, and we participate in their competitive tendering processes. Sometimes we win this work, sometimes we don't. In the year 2019-20, the Vegetable Fund spent just over $20 million in total, $3 million of which were costs incurred by Hort Innovation to oversee and manage the fund, with another $17 million spent on actual R&D projects. In all, there were 88 projects funded. The purpose of resetting the plan is to make sure the industry derives the maximum value from the investment made by both growers and the taxpayer, given each contribute around 50%. That means, to be effective, the plan needs to very clearly identify those areas where investments can make a difference. The fund can't be all things to all people, and it can't solve all of the problems the industry faces. And so the plan should not be a long list. In fact, I suspect that 88 projects, which we're currently doing now, at an average value of 195, is likely already to be too many, with too long a tail of activities that are underinvested and possibly deliver feel-good value only. Hort Innovation's own project performance analysis must identify those projects that are either subscale or for some other reason not proving to be effective, so that wasteful investments can be routinely eliminated. So that means the purpose of wide consultation is not to come up with a long list of needs and consequently a long list of projects, but rather to identify the several critical industry challenges and opportunities that can be substantially impacted by a laser-sharp investment focus of sufficient size. On a similar theme, the Vegetable Fund, whilst being the biggest, is one of 37 horticulture commodity funds that Hort Innovation manages. How many times do each of these funds try to solve the same issues identified and tackled by other funds? I know this is a key concern of Hort Innovation, and they try hard through the Frontiers Fund and by other mechanisms to consolidate these activities wherever they can. And their biggest impediment is often, though not always, the stewards of each fund, the SIAP members and active growers, who often expect all of their fund to be clearly spent on their perspective of an issue. AusVeg will endeavour to support Hort Innovation wherever it can demonstrate the benefits of pooling resources. We'd also like to see this intent reflected very clearly in this new investment plan at every opportunity. So as well as guiding what should and should not be funded by the Vegetable Fund, the Strategic Investment Plan provides guidance to Hort Innovation more broadly on what activities growers want them to engage in and what they don't. This should assist the work we still have to do to define what space the Industry R&D Corporation needs to occupy alongside industry groups, such as PIB like AusVeg. So we encourage growers to participate in this process, because it's important that growers understand how their levies are invested on their behalf. We obviously get asked a lot of times by growers about whether their investment is delivering, claiming that they can never see the benefits. My answer is always to ask them whether they've read magazines like Vegetable Australia, which is actually jam-packed with levy-funded activity. I think it's pretty clear that Vegetable Fund is an extremely important industry resource. The Strategic Investment Plan, if it's to be effective, needs to be a roadmap that selects what's in and what's out. Thanks, Nathan.
Thanks very much, James. I would now like to introduce Adam Briggs from Hort Innovation to talk a little bit about the data that's underpinning the Strategic Investment Plan.
Thanks, Nathan, and hello, everybody. We've just got a bit of a deck here that we'll bring up, so just bear with us while we get there. While we're getting that up, what I will do is just talk to you a little bit about the performance investment analysis. So we've been doing this across all of the industries, and it's really important piece of work to help us understand exactly what it is that we've been performing on and how the investments have been tracking. What we'll need to do first, though, is just get it up on the screen so we can get that going. So just bear with us for one moment. Yep, share screen. Great. Thanks for bearing with us. All good? Thanks. Yes. So as I was saying, so we've gone through all of the levy funds, and we have had this existing plan as we've outlined, and we've been investing against that over the last 5 years to help set us up to tackle this renewed plan for the coming 5 years. It's important for us to understand exactly what it is that we have achieved, any potential gaps that we might not have achieved against, and what this means for the coming future 5-year period. So I'll take you through at a high level some of the results that we've come up with specific for vegetables through this piece of work. So the existing plan, as we know, it's been active since July 2016, and we've just heard in terms of the volume of investment over the last 5 years, we've actually spent over $80 million of R&D levy funds against this plan. So it's been a significant investment that's gone on, and it's important that we understand what it is that investment means using the strategic investment plan, because that's how we are investing, against the priorities for the vegetable industry. And the way the plan is set up is we set up we've got 5 outcomes the current plan has, and a number of strategies that then guide investment through to an additional level of detail. And what we're able to do through taking into consideration of those strategies is it gives us a point in time perspective of performance, and it helps sets us up to look forward. So what we've done is, in the strategic investment plan, there were a number of KPIs, which are key performance indicators. So they're basically measures of success around what does success mean for the fund. So we've taken a look at those KPIs and reviewed those KPIs against all of the investments that have gone on against the relevant areas. And we've assigned them a simple classification. The KPI has either been achieved, it's in progress through a current or active investment, or we haven't actively invested in the area and therefore it's not achieved. So that's the criteria by which we've made our assessment. And again, it serves as a bit of a goalpost, a bit of a temperature check to see where we're at with respect to our current plan. And we can use that perspective and insight to then springboard into the next 5-year period. So what I'll do is I'll review at a high level the overall plan perspective, and then I'll take you through again at a high level at each outcome to see how those KPIs have actually been achieved. So starting off with the overall overview of the Vegetable Strategic Investment Plan for 2017 through to 2021, the plan that we're in at the moment, we can see here the expenditure share on strategic investment plan outcomes. There's 5 outcomes, as I've mentioned, with a small allowance for enabling funds, which allows us to invest against the plan. Breaking this down overall, we can see that the dominant outcome area concerns productivity, where 35% of the investment has been spent. This is then followed by capability, which is concerned with improving the capability of the industry to adopt and uptake the relevant R&D that's been happening. We're then seeing a smaller amount, but still significant amount, being invested in both domestic demand and export. Combining those 3 areas together, we see that there's effectively a balanced investment between the productivity or the supply capacity of the industry, the demand side around export and domestic demand development with around another 30%, and then again another 30% or so in capability. We've seen a smaller amount of investment, only 2% in supply chain. We'll get to that when we go through. So that's just a bit of a perspective in terms of the balance of the expenditure. But now I'll go through each outcome area at a high level, because we don't have the time today to do that, nor is that the purpose of this meeting. But the purpose is just to give you a feel for the level of work that we're doing at the start to make sure that Mark, Jane and the team here at Hort are going to be framing up our understanding of the issues and what that means for the renewed SIP. So domestic demand is the first outcome of the SIP, and that's basically concerned with increasing the demand and the value of the domestic vegetable industry. There's 6 strategies that we've come up with to drive this outcome area, and you can see those listed here around consumer insights, value adding, stakeholder education, food service, product differentiation, and food safety. I won't go into the specifics of this slide, but we'll take you through what we've found at the KPI level. There were 14 KPIs in this outcome, and it's great to see that the majority of these were achieved, and a significant also share of those are also in progress. The areas not achieved, which we can go through in the next slide, relate to building capacity with respect to food service providers, and also around some of the economic outputs from new product development. But on the balance, we've been investing, again, quite significantly. I think it was around 17% of the fund, and we're on track. We're achieving a lot. This slide shows you exactly what we have invested in against the strategic area, and some key projects that have supported that investment. So one of the major investments in domestic demand has been the Harvest to Home Consumer Insights platform, and that's really shifted the dial to unlock a range of insights for growers to help understand what makes consumers tick, and how they can align their products and opportunities to best meet the demands of the consumer. That's been a significant achievement for the fund. There has been some work, a range of work really done across exploring what are those opportunities for product value adding, product differentiation, and again, another significant platform, the Phenomenon platform, supporting education of some of those key consumers as well. An area we haven't invested in with respect to this plan has been specifically on scoping out food service opportunities beyond that scoping level. We've done a high-level scoping study, but we haven't then necessarily taken that next step to unlock how we engage with food service providers directly. So that we've recorded, we haven't achieved against that area. And we're also, the food safety area is an area in progress. So we've got active investments in this space, as you can see there, around GAP certification and ProbaSafe being a couple of significant ones, but again in progress. So still actively working towards that area. So some key takeaways for domestic demand: increased grower understanding of the market and engaged consumers. Yes, that has been achieved, particularly through the Consumer Insights platform. And ongoing, we think that this area of domestic demand is critical, because really, if we don't increase domestic demand, we're not going to get higher returns for growers. We can grow as much as we want, but if the demand isn't there, there's going to be very little to gain from that. And food safety is also underpinning that demand. So moving forward, the SIPE and the industry more broadly through the consultation is we'll take a closer look at this area, particularly around food service and what that means, and continue to prioritise investment accordingly. So moving on to the second outcome of export. Exports, again, are a significant and growing outlet for the industry, with around 13% of investment in exports. And I believe in 2018-19, around 7% of levyable vegetables produced in Australia were exported. So whilst that is a relatively low volume, it's been growing at a significant rate, and it is a very important market for the industry to continue to develop going forward as another demand lever to pull on. And there's a range of strategies there that we've been investing in to drive that. Again, 14 KPIs in this area, and a very similar achievement level as well. All KPIs against those strategic areas we have achieved against. There has been some limitations in the investment, particularly around regional export development and also e-commerce platforms. But on the whole, there's obviously the vegetable export program that's been achieving some great outcomes for industry, and we can see that here. And particularly, I'd call out there that in terms of the midterm review that was completed back in 2018, there was a direct attribution of over $20 million of export revenue linked back to this program. So that's a huge win for industry, and it goes to show that how the investment is driving outcomes for industry against those strategies. And also, another statistic there is we're seeing more vegetable growing farms exporting produce. So starting in 2015-16, only 2% of farms were exporting. We've seen that over the last 3 to 4 years tick up to 3%. While that doesn't actually look like a significant increase, when you boil that down to the number of businesses that would underpin, that there would be a number of businesses there that have now since come into exporting vegetables over that time, as supported by the investment. So that's a great outcome. Again, limited investment in e-commerce and regional investment, again, has been limited as well. But that's something we can refine and we can explore when we renew this new strategic investment plan. So some key takeaways, as I mentioned, the share of vegetables produced that have been sent to export has increased. And as of 2018-19, that was at 7.3%, and likely with updated data that would be a higher figure there. Over $45 million of export revenue across 2 years in 2018 and 2019 were attributed to the Vegetable Development Export Development Program, which is a fantastic outcome. This is something to consider going forward. So one of the major perceived barriers to growing exports by growers was that it's too hard and it's too time consuming. So that's potentially a focus area for the way we frame up ongoing export development, is helping them break that down around what it takes to export and how to succeed in this area. But broadly, industry is on track to achieve the 40% growth target that was set through the Vegetable Export Development Program, and that's a great outcome. So renewing and setting the scene for the next SIP is what does that mean? What does that look like for the next 5 years? So these are some considerations we're using to frame up the consultation. Moving now to productivity, the third outcome area. Again, and this has been the most significant area of investment within the current plan. Obviously, if we're not producing, then what are we doing? So a huge investment, particularly for the industry in pest and disease, as you can see, was one of the most significant strategies driving the productivity outcome for the industry, followed by the advanced technologies strategy 8 there. There are a number of KPIs here, 21 KPIs in fact, with a fair proportion of achievement, but a lot also in progress or not achieved as well. But again, the majority of those investments were achieved. And key areas to support in progress investments or those that have not been achieved have been more around the measurements around some of the particular strategies, particularly around the adoption of farm waste reduction practices, the development of cultivars, and environmental practices. But again, this is high level, and you can see here at a strategic level, quite a few of those are in progress. So we've deemed that we haven't fully, we can't just draw a line and say yes, green light achieved, move on. But the nature of these strategic areas is something that's continually in progress. So when we're looking at the evidence that we've collected here, what that looks like for the future SIP, we're taking that point in time perspective and going to be interpreting that for what's appropriate for extending that out over the coming 5 years. But again, a number of key programs here that would be familiar to most of you have been highlighted as contributing, particularly in soil and water management. The soil wealth program, we found that over the course of that program, over 1,900 growers have been directly impacted through either attending an event or nominating as being impacted in terms of their farm practice directly through that program. So we see that as a great outcome in alignment to the broader SIP. Some key takeaways from this outcome. So again, grower engagement is key here for productivity, and we should build on existing success. So we've got a lot of legacy work in areas like soil wealth and the IPDM program. So we want to build. We don't want to, again, start from scratch. And again, the final point is building the capacity to adopt the initiatives. We can do all the research in the world, but if we don't have the underlying capacity, then we're not going to get very far. The fourth outcome with far less investment was to do with the supply chain. And this was looking at increasing the integration and the broader development of the supply chain. And yeah, we haven't seen as much investment here, and that may be due to just prioritization, where the other outcome areas were more important at that particular point in time. So it has been relatively minor and a relatively smaller outcome area as well, with only 6 KPIs listed. And again, due to the limited nature of the investment, we have seen a higher share of those KPIs not being achieved. That's of no surprise given the investments that we've made. There has been some progress around some work that was done looking to integrate across the supply chain. So particularly post-harvest best practice initiative was one of those key pieces of work, as well as a pilot around some wholesale market price reporting material. But there hasn't been any direct investment with respect to product quality and how that relates to the supply chain, and also models for collaboration. So these areas were noted as being important at the time of the current strategic investment plan, but we might revisit those when we're drafting and renewing the plan going forward. So in summary, again, for here, we should put on the table if areas around supply chain collaboration and quality are still relevant, and how we could package for the industry and how we could package those up going forward. But again, through this review, we've found very limited investment here. So again, something we can explore as part of the renewal. Finally, the final outcome relates to capability. And this is all around basically how can we improve the engagement and the ability of growers to take on all of the R&D that's happening, and make a difference for their actual farm and their business. And you can see 5 strategies. We've seen significant investment in communications. You know, if growers aren't aware of what's happening, if we're not communicating to them, then they have no actual chance of taking anything on. So that's been a key focus of investment. But there's also been activity going on around innovation support, professional development, and farm management and new talent as well. In terms of the outcomes, again, as you've seen, the KPIs, 13 KPIs, with the majority of those recording an achievement against those, with just 2 in progress. So again, we've seen comprehensive investment in this area, and the majority have been achieved, which is great. The key investments that characterise this outcome have related to the industry communications program, as I've alluded to before. And what we found there is just an example of some of the highlights. Is through that investment, we've seen of all of the growers that have directly interacted with those communication outputs, 43% of those have actually made some sort of change or implementation on farm. And similarly with the extension VegNet piece of work, which again has been another key investment for the industry, 71% of participants who directly engaged in that program have actually changed their practice as a result. So that's a really great signal for us to know that these investments are actually making a difference for how growers are working and running their businesses, which has been really good to see. There's been a few other investments here that we've made in those areas as well. So some of those investments may also be familiar with you. And fortunately, you see the green achievement there. So that's again fantastic to see. And yeah, summing up this final area, industry capability, it underpins everything else. It's really an enabler, if you like, to help the industry achieve. So we see that as something that's, as it is an enabler, will likely continue into the new strategic investment plan. But it's just, again, tightening up those measures around what does success look like for this area into the future. That's what we'll try to get out of this consultation in terms of where the growers' priorities are and how they're engaging with extension at the moment. So in summary, again, I can appreciate there's been a lot of content to get through. So thanks for bearing with me, and it is a lot of work going on. So to distill that into 15 minutes, it's by no means an easy task. So hopefully that's just given you a bit of an insight. But again, as I've mentioned, what we're looking to do here is take the perspective of how the fund has been performing and use that internally with Mark and the ISP team and Jane and her extension team when we're going out and consulting with you directly, is using this insight to get us a bit of a head start, so we can lead in with these conversations, and of course listen to you as part of that process, but we'll be able to offer the insight in terms of what we've delivered against so far. So yeah, that's what I've got to share with you today. So I hope that's been useful, and I'll now divert back to Nathan.
Thanks, Adam. It's fantastic insight, and appreciate you taking the time to go through that with us and the group here today. Before we go on to our next speaker, we just have a quick poll that we would like to get some feedback on from the participants today. So if you can just take your time to have a read through that and select the option that's most appropriate for you. So that is, from the current gaps identified during the SIP performance review, which do you believe should be the key priority for vegetable levy investment? Okay, and now we will move on to Brian Ramsey, who is the Strategic Investment Plan Consultant, who's put in a lot of work on the development of this next update. So, Brian, I'll hand over to you. If you can give us your presentation, please.
Thanks, Nathan. I'll just pop that up. Can everybody see that? Yep. Okay. Well, I'm glad to be on board, having a chat with you guys. It's, as James and Matt said earlier, these things are really important documents, but it can seem a bit hard slog trying to get your head around what's happening. And it's how, trying to find something that's produced something that's very focused and clear, but also captures the things that really matter is a disciplined process. So to follow on from Adam, what I'd like to do is, probably try and answer some of the questions that growers might have, which is, well, you're talking about this process, or what is the process? How can I have a say in that process? When can I have a say in that process? And, what's the overall timing for this? So I'll share what we've been doing with you in only a couple of slides. And I'll otherwise be happy to try and answer some questions as we go. So the first point is that this is actually a refresh. So we're not starting from a blank sheet and saying, where do we go to from here? We're saying that as you just heard, there's a previous SIP. An enormous amount of work was done as part of that SIP. And as James mentioned, it's very significant investments by the vegetable industry in this area. Secondly, since the last SIP was done, we now actually have a really strong, in Hood Innovation, a really strong data and analytics capability so that it can provide input. And you just got a bit of a taste of that from what Adam was talking about. So that capability was nothing like this in 2017. The third thing is that we know that an enormous amount of work has gone in across the industry with grower input through the national and regional extension plan process. That's very recent, and there's a lot of really granular, detailed information has been able to come up through the system to connect through with Hood Innovation. So Jane and her team have really got a lot of fairly current knowledge in this area. The fourth thing is that there's ongoing relationships, as we saw with Ausveg and with other IRBs and such as Fresh Produce Alliance and others, many others across the industry. So in a day-to-day work, Hood Innovation engages a lot with from customers of the industry through to growers and everybody in between. So those conversations are going on all the time, and we wanted to make sure in the process that rather than going out and asking people to repeat things, that we actually try to capture all that we can in the process so that we can take that information, put it into the SIP development process and try and ask the right questions to engage with growers. The final point that's not up there is the one we all already know, is that while there is an existing SIP and it is a refresh, it's also been quite a dramatic year in terms of shockwaves in markets and industries due to the pandemic. So some things could and should change. The industry isn't exactly the same as it was anyway 4 years ago. So my next point, what is this refresh process we're all talking about? Basically, it's just 3 steps. And when you distill it right down, we're taking 3 steps: preparing, consulting, and then validating it. So there's a lot behind that, though. As you saw the preparation phase, you saw one part of it there with Adam, which is the previous SIP performance review. That's an input to our considerations in developing up and how do we get this SIP focus so that, as I like the way James said, it can't be all things to all people. How do we really get focused in a way that is, robust and in a way that resonates with the growers? And there are other inputs with, portfolio reviews and, as I said, the national and regional extension plans and other industry data. And the way we're organising that information is around basically 4 themes, which are really just common sense things for a business when you look at it. And they are demand creation, supply, production, productivity, sustainability, that cluster of activities. Thirdly, extension and capability for innovation. And fourthly, business insights, which is again around having good intel to feed into the process of into the SIP and make sure we're doing the right thing. So that process is, that's the preparation phase. The second phase, which is consultation, the vegetable industry is a massive industry in horticulture, as we all know. So what we've been doing is taking a tailored approach with different industries. So smaller and maybe more concentrated, or industries, we're taking slightly different approaches. For the vegetable industry, we're taking quite a broad approach, which includes this sort of engagement that we're doing now. But if you look at the second phase, which is consultation, one aspect of that is some targeted one-on-one interviews with growers, with key delivery partners, and with industry-related bodies across the industry. So that phase is about to start. So one of the things you can do is now being able to engage with Mark and others. But if you really have strong views you want to share, it's a perfect time now, is one of the messages from what I'm talking about, is we're just about to start this industry engagement phase. We are starting it now. Having done all that, we'll integrate it into a draft SIP, and it'll be uploaded onto the web so that industry can provide feedback. The industry-related bodies can provide feedback. We can get feedback from SIAPs and others, and then formulate that into a strategic investment plan, including KPIs. So it's not only the sort of numbers of strategies and projects that are a consideration, but trying to narrow down those KPIs to make them meaningful and not too many of them, so that we can really measure how we go. Which brings me to my third point, which is what's the timing? Where are we at? Well, the preparation phase is pretty much done. We've actually pulled together all that information. You've seen just some of it from Adam. And we're now entering the engagement phase with these webinars. There'll be the Hort Connections seminar, and the target interviews. Those are going to happen, from now through till July. And then the validation phase will be when we have a draft SIP, and we'll be looking for online feedback through the Hort Innovation website, and that'll be that July-August period. So with a view to having a final SIP good to go around August this year. So that would be a done. So it's, one of the things I would say at this point is you can have a lot of comfort when you go out and do all this analysis, and you look retrospectively, and you talk to the various organisations and that you normally would. However, there's always new things and new perspectives that matter. There are things that have changed that do matter. And that's why this next phase with consultation is so important. And now is a good time over the next few weeks to know what are the things that do matter, that are different, that we should be knowing, because that will help shape the SIP. So I actually don't have more to add at this point. I would, try to just say, we're not starting with a blank sheet. It is a 3-step process. We're just starting the engagement phase now, and we've got a lot of information behind us, and we're looking for that value adding from growers over the next few weeks, and not only growers, but the industry related bodies and industry partners and others. So can I hand back to you, Nathan, and we take it from there? And I'll stop.
Sorry. No worries. Thanks very much, Brian. Appreciate that. And thank you also to Adam, James and Matt for their presentations as well. So just before we go into some questions that have come through over the course of the webinar, we've got a couple more polls that we'll run through quickly just to obtain a bit more feedback. The first one of those is up on the screen now. If you could tick the one that's most relevant to you, that would be much appreciated. And we'll bring the final poll up now as well. Thank you for that. That should be coming up in a minute. Okay, and while they're finalising those options there, I'll go through some of the questions that have now been asked from the audience. So the first one, and any of the panelists can chime in and answer this, is how is the vegetable strategic investment plan going to be funded? So if someone from the panel would like to answer that, that would be fantastic.
I think that's one perhaps best answered by someone from Hort Innovation, isn't it?
I think so.
Mark?
Mark, perhaps yourself or Adam?
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Mark.
Talking about funding the actual strategic investment plan or the projects itself, obviously it's funded through the levy investment and the levy itself, as far as the funding of that is concerned. The majority of that work is being done internally in Hort Innovation rather than externally. So you can see myself here, Adam, and the rest of the team behind the scenes who are actually participants today as well, involved in putting together not only the preparation work, but also the consultation work. You'll see many of the faces up at Hort Connections if you are heading up to Hort Connections as well. Hort Innovation will have a stand up there as well. So that is the team that is putting together a lot of this information internally here at Hort Innovation.
Great, thank you. And another one that's come through is, how is the VegNet consultation process being incorporated into the new strategic investment plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. VegNet is obviously one of the most important projects and one of the largest projects for the industry. And we've been working really hard with the pre and post vegetable SIAP over the last couple of years to get that right. We only held a meeting in the last week on the next iteration of VegNet, which is VegNet 3.0, if we use some technology terms, and which will be coming out towards the latter end of this calendar year. So there's been a huge amount of workshops, and we have Jane Whiteman, who's the head of Extension Adoption, as a participant today as well, which many of you may know or seen around, and her team in the regions. There's been a lot of consultation with regional groups around Australia, a lot of inputs from growers already, and those regional plans roll up into a national extension plan. And that is fundamentally one of the absolute critical inputs into the next 5-year strategic investment plan. And the information coming out of that will be disseminated. I think James said it really well when he said, look, there's opportunities for not only multi-industry projects, but multi-regional projects as well, not just regions. And then looking at specifics in particular regions as well. Only last week, again, when we spoke to the joint SIAC, we were talking around area-wide management for fall armyworm and the ramifications that it is having and the potential ramifications it's having in particular regions. So it's critical that we go from bottom up at the regions, understand the pressure points in all the associated regions, and then layer across where those commonality is to get synergies, scalability of projects, and then look at other investments with other industries as well, whether that be a melon industry or whether it be sweet potatoes, or even if out of the fruit category, of how we can work better across horticulture on some of the big major projects as well. So hopefully that answers the question there.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mark. Another one that's come through is, how are we addressing the specific issues / threats to the industry for things such as fall armyworm?
Yeah, well, I think I answered a little bit on that. So one of the investments recommendations that came through last week, we held, as I said, we held an extraordinary SIAT meeting. It got put together very quickly. We have the ability to be agile when need to, especially on biosecurity incursions. We want to make sure that we're agile and we work very quickly on the needs there. Coming out of some of the consultation work on VegNet, was the need for potentially some more work in fall army work. And one of Jane's team members there was working with some of the regional bodies there and put forward an investment recommendation. 2 weeks later, we had that in front of the strategic investment panel. There's 21 people on that joint panel calling in from all across Australia, from areas that aren't affected, e.g. down in Tasmania, and from areas obviously WA up to Queensland and NT. And we had really broad discussions on what was needed based on the paper that was presented, and support was given for new investment in that area and to do that critically as soon as possible. So I guess there is work coming through, and it is a topic of discussion right now, and we're being agile and moving to it straight away.
Fantastic, thank you. A couple more that have come through as well. So another interesting one is, how can we invest in demand creation when we don't have a marketing levy for vegetables?
Yeah, I might. I mean, Brian, I don't want to take up all the conversation here.
Yeah.
Brian, feel free to jump in, and also Adam.
Yeah.
I'm more than happy to add as well.
Yeah, I'll have a crack at that. So yeah, it's a good question because as we know, there's no marketing levy, but we can still use R&D funds, as we have been over the last sort of 5 years, to help understand particularly what the consumer opportunities are, to help help growers and industry understand how we can best progress and move the industry forward to make sure we're meeting what the consumers are expecting. So through that, particularly the harvest to home investment has been a really great example of that, where and you can Google this online if you haven't done so already. It'll show up there as your first hit. And through that piece of work, we look to understand what particularly the usage and attitudes of consumers are, and how they relate to vegetables. And that allows an understanding of the triggers and barriers to purchase. That information can be used by growers to basically take stock of what they're growing, consider if the products that they're growing are meeting and matching consumer needs, and the research particularly highlights key opportunities for growers to consider how they can target consumers. So it's not necessarily just we're not necessarily relying on promotions to create demand opportunities. We can also lead from how we align the products and also the education as well. There's been a few initiatives there that we've funded, engaging with school children through curriculum support, through the phenomenon, the Vegecation website refresh, and some of those other initiatives around quality and making sure the product is up to scratch are all determinants of demand.
Fantastic, thanks, Adam. James, I'd be keen to get your thoughts on this particular question as well, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, it's a good one. Look, as important as Hort Innovation is, and the R&D funding is, we do have other tools in our toolkit. We are involved in a project that's chaired by Nutrition Australia called the Fruit and Veg Consortium, that's put together a business case, initially with some help from Hort Innovation, to actually put together a major campaign to grow domestic demand for vegetables. And we are in the process of beginning the process of trying to execute that plan. And it'll involve raising probably as much as $30 million of cash and in kind from a range of governments and industry to do a major behavioural change campaign, a bit like a slip, slop, slap, focused on healthy eating and the virtues of eating vegetables. So it's a pretty ambitious plan. It's taking some time to put it all together, but I think throughout the course of this calendar year, we'll be communicating more broadly just what those intentions are. There may be a role with Hort Innovation aware of the work. Currently, it can't be directly funded by the Veg Fund, but there may be other ways that Hort's involved. But it's actually a project that's going to require substantially more funds than even Hort would be able to contribute. So that's just another piece of work that's going on in parallel.
Fantastic. Thank you, James.
Just on that as well, Nathan, obviously R&D funds support trade and export development and demand drivers there for international and moving product offshore as well. So that's probably one of the most fundamental and critical projects there as well. And there's been a reinvestment in the next stage of the export development project with export facilitation in there as well. So while the current environment with COVID, there is a lot of, I guess, restrictions there from a freight capacity perspective at the moment, and that's been discussed at a strategic level, obviously through the new export plan that's just recently been launched as well, and highlights a two-phased approach there. And so we've really aligned the new investment there in the export development project with that export plan as well to tier back up again, because really that's what we're doing as an industry, is tiering back up again to those opportunities of increased freight capacity over the next few years. So that is a fundamental R&D investment to help demand.
Fantastic. Thank you. Brian, this one might be best positioned to yourself. How is protected cropping addressed in the new strategic investment plan?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure how it will be. I might have to get Mark to answer that. It's obviously a major part of the industry as it's evolving. So it's got a strong importance. I think though the draft strategy is still coming. It was clearly one of the strategies in the previous plan, and I would expect that we'll have something on that in the new one. Mark, I don't know whether you would have anything to add or.
I absolutely do. Sorry. As we speak, probably an hour ago, there was a meeting with some of the experts in protected cropping as well for an initial start process in protected cropping as far as advice is concerned. So we are getting input. There is a new strategy being developed as far as protected cropping is concerned. It is a small segment overall. We have to be realistic. It is a small segment overall within the industry, but that doesn't mean that there isn't opportunities and growth opportunities into the future. And it is a priority there, not only from industry and the players involved, but also larger than just us in horticulture as far as protected cropping is concerned, especially around biosecurity, sustainability, and natural resource usage as well, and the opportunities there for process efficiencies. We've got Hort Frontiers, which is an opportunity for further investment for outside capital, not just levy funds to be pulled in there, which we work currently with the future CRC there. QDAF, as I said, are doing the writing the strategy at the moment, and we expect that to be one of the key inputs as well. Brian showed the inputs, and we just discussed VegNet being one of the critical inputs. The strategy that's being developed from QDAF on protected cropping will be one of those inputs as well, and we expect that to be finished hopefully by the end of May. And distributed then, and then that will be another input into the 5-year strategic investment plan as well.
Fantastic, thank you. We've probably got time for 2 more questions, so I'll just go through a couple more that are here. And if we don't get a chance to answer all of them, we'll send the questions through to the panelists and seek their input post-event. So another one here for the group is how to best provide resources for the national curriculum, which is currently under review, to enable the curriculum to accurately reflect the sustainable and regenerative practices in horticulture. And then it goes on to say, I understand Hort Innovation has recently become a member of PIEFA, so is this on the agenda?
I can answer some of that. I'm probably getting into a little bit of detail on the question. We have Bianca Cairns, who looks after the portfolio of leadership and capacity building. So this would sit under Bianca, and Bianca's heavily involved in actually driving the membership there as well. I'm not off the top of my head, I'm unsure of the projects there. As James said, I think there's 84 currently contracted projects within the veg levy. So I'd probably have to take a little bit of that on notice and come back to the specific person on some answers. But absolutely, it is a critical input. And I think we've got one more poll potentially, and capacity and leadership building is one of the key foundational outcomes in the new strategic investment plan. And any potential projects in the curriculum area would sit underneath that foundational outcome for. So absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. And the final question that we have is, how will you engage with supply partners?
The idea was, as I said, with the one-on-one interviews, that we would have them with growers, but also with industry-related bodies, not only industry bodies, but it's engaging with the value chains really that are involved in meeting the market. So I would expect there'd be some one-on-one interviews, but I think more than that, one of the things that is a bit different with this process is you don't have a big field of consultants running around talking to everybody and all of them having knowledge around what different players in the supply chain were saying. You actually have the big team, which is actually the staff within Hort Innovation, the specialists there that are on their day job are interacting. You've got the AusVeg team and the people they're interacting with that we can tap into as well. So I think it'll provide a lot more depth and quality into the whole process by having that sort of in-house capability being even stronger. So maybe others have got a comment on that, but it's a good question.
Yeah, I'll probably only reiterate what you're just saying. The R&D team or wherever that be, the trade team, if it's biosecurity incursion, Greg here at Hort Innovation is talking with everyone around that area and Plant Health Australia obviously as well. If it's around plant breeding, etc., we've got Vino. If it's around curriculum, we've got Bianca who's having those discussions. So realistically, it's at that grassroots level with the R&D managers where those conversations can happen and should be occurring, whether that be now for the SIP or on our annual investment plans each year for the industry. The SIAP meets once a year to discuss what the next financial year annual investments will be and gives advice into those investment recommendations. And those are built in collaboration and partnership, whether that be discussions with James's team in specialist areas like Zarmeen or Michael, or indeed the comms team or Nathan as far as Hort Connections is concerned. We have those robust discussions, we have those one-on-one discussions, and then build those investment recommendations collaboratively. It's not one way or the other, it's working those together. So I guess from a delivery partner perspective, all I can say is get to know those team members within Hort Innovation, reach out to AusVeg or Hort Innovation via myself as the industry strategic partner, and make sure that we're connected. Make sure you're connected to the right people and have those conversations.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mark, and thank you to all of our panelists. That's sort of all we have time for now as far as questions are concerned. Really appreciate everyone for jumping on and participating, and look forward to gathering some more feedback from you all as we continue on this process. The next sort of iteration of this, as we mentioned off the top, will be at Hort Connections through the annual Vegetable Industry Seminar. So that'll take place on Wednesday, the 9th of June as one of the concurrent sessions there. So for those of you who haven't registered yet, please go to the website, which is hortconnections.com.au to register. We've seen some fantastic participation from the supply chain and growers alike, and we're certainly really looking forward to having the opportunity to get together as an industry again and network after missing the opportunity in 2020. So yeah, really hoping to see all of you there in a few short weeks. So that's everything from us. Again, thank you to the panelists and thank you to the participants as well, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.